Hey, so in this video we're going to be talking about a little bit of mixing and mastering. Basically the previous video where it was the challenge with me and Adam writing different pieces of music, he had just one library, I had the whole Imperia collection. Today I'm just going to do this short video just to show you how I've mixed it, maybe some mixing things and mainly the mastering, right? Like what I kind of look out for to make it punchy, maybe to make it feel loud enough, right? In terms of what I'm aiming for, how I'm metering all of that. Let's dive into it. Where do we begin? I obviously have my mix books here, which is where my mastering is going. This is how I have everything rooted in my template. And then that goes to a stereo out. And here I have a level meter and loudness meter, which is how I check to see how loud the mastering actually is, what it's doing. And we'll get to all of this a little bit later when we talk about the mastering, but just want you to be aware of what's going on there. So I will turn off everything on the mastering chain that's on the mix bus, but keep the limiter on just so we have the same level throughout, so it's not like crazy different volume differences, but it won't really be changing the sound too much. I mean, it will have some sort of character, but I'm not doing anything with the EQ or imager. It's just the limiter. That's all it is. So I want to show you the brass first. So if I turn off all these reverb sends that I have, and I'll turn off this, this is what my brass sounds like. Now let's compare that to once it's actually mixed. Now that section, for example, let's turn off everything. This is how that sounds. Talos and Jaeger have a really nice sound, but they're very dry, so I wanted to add a bit of reverb. This is how we sound with reverb. Also a bit of Valhalla room to add room and things like that. It's different, it changes based on the track, and it also changes based on the library that I'm using. So that's kind of their preset in my template, but I will change it around as well. In terms of EQ, this is what we have. If I turn the EQ back on, because it's quite a busy track, I wanted it to be thinned out a bit more. So we have just some of those low mids being cut out in the French horns. It's like that kind of scoop, just getting rid of those mids. And then same here, just kind of shaping the sound. If I solo these, you'll be able to hear it a little bit more. Specifically the low brass in these sections, I think, is quite a good one. Can really hear how much of a difference that's making, right? That's pretty much what's going on for everything. The other thing I have is a bit more EQ, just general tonal shaping on the kind of brass folder or bus or whatever you want to call it. And then I use this preset called Hard Basic, which just glues things together nicely for brass. In this kind of context, right? Really kind of dense hybrid orchestral track. Strings, it's the same thing. I have the same C4 multiband compressor there. If I turn off all the mixing, let's see how I can do this. Let's do strings short as well. Massive difference. So what's going on there? Just controlling those, again, low mids. Same thing, right? So I have soothe on the violas as well. It's controlling all of that, which you can now hear. again, I'm trying to make space because this is a very dense track, and I want to hear just what we need. This is getting rid of some of the, controlling that a bit more, but it's mainly this. 1.5k, something around there, and then also like you can get to that sometimes around 2-3k isn't always pleasing in strings, but that's basically it. It's just going through, listening to the sound, seeing what I can take out, seeing what makes sense in the context of this track, right? One last thing on the strings, actually, I do, like I said, just have another general EQ, just shaping it a bit more. So I think when I came to mastering, I was like, all right, they need more mids cutting out. And then again, same preset on here, adjusted slightly maybe. But yeah, this is all the percussion. Getting rid of some of those low mids again. And that's all it is. I'm doing the same thing. I'm just, you know, mixing it as I go. Add a bit of reverb. Remove some frequencies I'm not feeling, like that one. That's it. That's all mixing really is. You're just looking out for things like that, making sure there's space for things as well. You know, for example, this is the big bass pulse, and so I just make sure there's nothing else getting in the way of that. So I've got the bass side chained to the percussion, the low percussion, because they're both low end elements. They're the big kind of bass elements in this track. And so I'm just making sure when like the big hits happen, big low hits, that the bass is just ducking a little bit by maybe 2-3 dB, just getting out of the way so that you have a bigger impact. That makes a huge difference if you do that. Try that and you'll see that your mixes start sounding punchier. Okay, a few other things. I don't want to spend too long on mixing here. Out of the box, chorus was sounding like this. Still pretty cool. And then with my mixing, choir can be quite busy in those kind of mids, and you don't really need it if they're in a piece like this where they're just sort of in the background as an epic element. That kind of boxiness that you can hear is gone. All of that. That's not needed really in this kind of track when the choir's in the background. So that just helps it all kind of come together and it doesn't muddy up the sound then, basically. Why don't we have a quick listen? We'll keep the volume of everything, but let's turn off all the mixing. See what happens. I'm going to turn off everything except for this sound, because this sound out of the box was like this. Quite aggressive. That's how it is in the track. And that's pitch shifted, so we don't want that doubled. So anyway, this is everything else turned off except for that signature sound. Let's have a listen to this now. Alright, so here's what's happening. If we have the limiter, we have all the mixing on, but we've turned off everything else. Right, so first of all, multiband compressor, check this out. You hear that punch? I like what it's doing with the low end and controlling those kind of mids. That's nice. This isn't required on here, but I just like it. And then Oxford inflator. I'm driving the input a bit. This effect is going up here, right? The curve is affecting the tonality of it, so that's cool. That's just coloring the sound. Then we have this EQ. Getting rid of those kind of frequencies. Just controlling that a bit more, around 1K. Around 3K gets quite harsh, so I'm controlling that as well. Nice, and then we have a clipper. And so that clipper, I've got these two linked, in and out, softening by 22%, sealing at minus 0.1. And it's doing about 2 dB reduction in these big transient peaks so that we can push the loudness more with the limiter. I go into the limiter, I set the ceiling to minus 1 dB in this case, and then play around with the threshold until I'm getting this. This is what I'm monitoring. Let's see, peak and RMS. So what I'm doing is I'm listening to the track and make sure these are checking. Integrated LUFS, for this I'm going for around minus 11, which is quite loud. Typically for streaming, I think you're going for about minus 14 LUFS. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically, like I said, checking that we're hitting around minus 14 integrated LUFS, but that won't come till later. And what I'm doing here is I'm checking that the peak is minus 1, which is what I've set it to in the limiter as the ceiling. And I'm checking that the RMS is going around minus 10 dB. That's what I'm aiming for. Now the reason that I'm using a clipper plugin before the limiter is so that I can increase the perceived loudness and RMS. And that's done by basically trimming the peaks, the transients, and it allows the limiter to work better, basically. And that's how you can get more perceived loudness. If you had really big transients, like big peaks, then what would happen is the limiter would crush that transient, but then everything else wouldn't be so crushed, and you'd get that kind of almost pumping sound. You want to make sure that the difference between like your big transient hits and the rest of the music isn't so drastic in a waveform. Which is why, you know, sometimes in mastering you can just work with the actual mix of the track and not do it in the session like I'm doing like this. I am not a professional mixing engineer or mastering engineer. I'm just showing you what I do in my workflow as a composer, whether it's my work with Audio Imperia, when I'm working on library music or any stuff for trailer music. It's not necessarily the same with films and video games. There's usually a separate process to that, but anything for like library music, trailer music, sample library demo tracks, all of that kind of stuff, this is the kind of approach I take. You know, everything I've mentioned here about the mastering, you don't need all of this. This is just my preference of how I like things to sound. If you do a bit of clipping to get rid of any big peaks, it means that you can then push the loudness more with the mastering. But this is just from what I understand based on advice from other composers and people I've spoken to. You could really, like, to do this, you could just do a clipper, any kind of clipper, and then a limiter, and that would be fine. You don't need to do all this other stuff, but that's just what I do. So, I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. If you are a professional mixing or mastering engineer and you have any tips or tricks of how I could improve what I do, or anyone else can improve what they do in terms of mixing and mastering, leave them down in the comments below. And for all of you composers who aren't professional mixing and mastering engineers, what are some of your favorite mixing tips and tricks that you might have learned along the way? Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.